Hello, and welcome to the Sexy Authors Podcast, a podcast about very important books and the very important people who write them. Today, I have with me Dr. Gloria Brame. She is a legendary author, award-winning sex therapist, and certified sexologist. And Dr. Gloria G. Brame has been a pioneer of BDSM fetish study, education, research, and advocacy for over 30 years. She is an emeritus member of AASECT, which is the American Association of Sex Educators, Counselors, and Therapists. Dr. Gloria Brame also founded the first online peer support forum for kinky people on Compuserve in 1987 and published her first bestseller, Different Loving, in 1993. Her books have won many awards and accolades for their penetrating insights into adult sexuality. Gloria has maintained a passionate commitment to helping sexually non-conventional people overcome obstacles and find their joy. Gloria has also authored 11 books in different genres to spread her gospel that sex and gender diversity is the true norm for adults. Everybody, welcome Gloria. Hi, Gloria. It's so wonderful to
Hi,
have you.
Cindy. Thank you so much for inviting me.
I'm so excited about this conversation that we're going to have today, and then to also talk about your latest book. But I just want to I want our audience to sort of like to get to know you. You're like the pioneer. You're in my world, you're the pioneer. So I feel especially honored to be sitting here and
Well,
chatting with you today. I've looked up to you and admired your work for as long as I can remember. So,
I,
feeling
I
very
came in
honored.
on the covered wagons. That's true. That's how old I am.
The covered wagons, I love it. Well, I mean, you are a true pioneer. Like you've been doing this long before I just did a video about same-sex marriage, for example. And even something as same-sex marriage is so recent and, wasn't legal until 2015. And so the work that you've been doing has been so needed. And, like, I guess one of my first questions for you is like, what inspired you to go against the grain, in such a major way?
And ruin my career as it was. Yes,
Yeah, tell me. Yeah, tell us. Tell
I was
us.
I was an English professor at the time and a freelance writer, also,
Hmm.
um, writing business articles because I had a finance background in my 20s. Even though I was an English major, I ended up, it's a long tortured story. But anyway, so I started on the sly, in other words, under a handle. I started a BDSM support group about 2 years after I got involved with BDSM, because the big revelation to me about kink, uh, I'd always had kinky fantasies, even when I was a kid, you know, and
Most people do.
yes, and I knew I had what people might call fetishes, and I was very ashamed about it. And I would propose something to a guy, and almost every guy turned me down and made me feel like a freak. But I did find one or two partners who were, moderately into it. And I finally came to find my truth and dealt with it, but it was a very revolutionary period in my life because it really changed everything, but it also gave me enormous relief to realize there was a label I could use for myself. And if
Mm.
I use that label, I could meet other people who had the same label and they wouldn't think I was freakish. They would appreciate me. I mean, I learned that myself by getting online. So I started this support group
Yep.
on CompuServe. I don't even know if it still exists, but it was the game back in the 80s. And what was amazing to me is I thought, there were like 100 or 200 of us in the whole United States, maybe.
Mm-hmm.
because my exposure was really limited. There was like a club you went to in New York. And then I discovered online, and this was before most people were even online. It was
Right.
a very small pool, maybe a few 100,000 people, not even a million yet at that point. And we had an incredible membership spike.
Wow.
Course of running that group. We started with like 40 people. We
Uh-huh.
ended up with 75,000 people in 2 years. So
Wow.
that told me that there was really a lot of interest in this, and really must be a lot of people in the closet. And in fact, a lot of the people who joined the group said, oh my God, this is the first time I've ever had any dialogue about this. This is the first time, of course, everyone used handles. This is the first time I've talked about it to anybody. And that's what inspired me to write the book, was the idea that, well, if that many people show up on, there wasn't even an internet, they showed, not a real internet, they showed up on Compuserve back in the mid 80s. If there were enough people to cram the server, you know, then what must the interest be throughout the country? And I was talking to a friend of mine. I was a poet. I haven't published in a while, but a fellow poet at the time, and he's like, you know, you make this whole, I think he called it SMBD or something. You know, he didn't know what
Mhm.
to call it, you know, but you make it sound like regular humans do it. And I remember
There
thinking,
it is. Yeah.
regular humans do it. That's who
Yeah.
does it. You know, it's not just this freakish minority, which had been my misapprehension
Hmm.
until I finally came to terms with it myself and started going to clubs. And there were a couple of more clubs to go to by the late 80s. You know,
Yes.
realized, my God, there are a lot of people who are doing this, you know, or interested and intrigued by some aspect of it. And he said, you really ought to write a book about that, you know, because you'll explain it in a way that, you know, isn't scary.
And you normalize it for people, right? You
And
normalize it for
normalize it.
people to make it more acceptable and
Right.
approachable.
And one of the um, offshoots of my research, which was voluminous, since I was already a college professor, I knew how to do research.
Right.
And my research showed me two radically, to me, important things. Important thing number one, of those people who originally came up with, you know, with the labeling of sexual disorders and sexual dysfunctions and sexual fetishes. So going all the way back to Kraft Ebing and even Havelock Ellis,
Hmm.
you know, they always presumed it was a flaw, that all human sexuality should be heteronormative, binary, you
Hmm.
know,
Vanilla.
and it's all about intercourse. And
Hmm.
anything else, you know, as I discovered, was viewed as a potential psychopathy.
Yeah.
And that psychiatrists viewed it that way, because you would go to the DSM of the day,
Hmm.
and anything that was other than intercourse, other than reproductive sex,
Yeah.
considered sinful, and that include blowjobs and hand jobs and masturbation.
Sodomy. Yeah. All of that is
All
pathologized.
of that, right. And they were sending people to asylums and put them on psychiatric drugs, and really basically, you know, torturing people for homosexuality too.
Yeah.
So, first of all, I realized that their very Victorian assumptions about what sex should be were completely theoretical. It didn't have a lick of science, certainly not as we define science in the modern age, a
Hmm.
lick of science to support it. They had no studies, they had no surveys, they had no scholars gathering research on these issues. And basically, we could keep some of the labels, but this notion that it implied that people were mentally unhealthy, mentally unwell, was dead wrong.
Mm-hmm.
So that was a great surprise. And being the person I am, being a poet, I always felt the important thing was connecting to people with truth, you know, and that the truth really, really matters. So you can
Right.
imagine what my political positions are. But anyway, truth really
Yeah.
counts, you know. And the second revelation, of course, was, or the logical conclusion was, they were so wrong about that. They were so wrong about so-called normal
Yeah.
that they were probably wrong about everything. And that sexual diversity, as I then pursued my scholarship into that area of
Uh-huh.
what is normal sex. And my conclusion was that sexual diversity is the norm,
Mm-hmm.
which means, yes, there are people who are monogamous and binary and heteronormative, and that's what's normal for them. But there are also people who are homosexual, bisexual, asexual, all of these other things, and non-binary and trans, you know, and that all of it was normal because it had always existed.
Yeah.
No matter how many attempts there had been by governments and churches,
Sure.
synagogues, temples, and mosques to bury that kind of knowledge and instead promote this, you know, religio-political platform that we must all do exactly this because we know what God wants. You know, my feeling was, why would we be so diverse then? Why would we be born diverse? Why would people like me basically look back at, you know, who I was even when I was 5 and was
Yeah.
fascinated by bondage in those old pirate movies? Yeah, that was like why I was there, you
Yeah.
know,
Yeah.
seeing bondage and other, you know, power relationships like that.
Yeah.
So that that changed everything for me. And actually, I think it has been a catalyst for a lot of people who don't even know I exist and don't know my name, but it's been a catalyst to get more and more people to question what is normal really,
Yeah.
rather than just take it on faith.
For sure, your work has been so important in the field, and maybe people don't know your name and your contributions, but they have been great because I mean, look at where we are now. I mean, even
Right.
like with the cheesy sort of like mainstream movies that come out that don't really represent BDSM and kink in
Mhm.
the way that they could, they're still out there, right? They're still
Yeah.
getting more and more
I don't
media
I don't
presence.
feel that any of the movies do because the more BDSM affirmative movies tend to focus on the community.
Mhm.
And the BDSM community, I am a part of it. I love it. Most of my friends are kinky. Um, that only represents yet another small side.
Yeah.
It's really global phenomenon
Yeah.
that people are by nature attracted to power relationships. People in every country in the world have been recorded to have fetishes. And what blows my mind is that it doesn't matter where you grow up. Chances are you're going to have the same fetishes in Eastern cultures as you do in Western cultures, the same fetishes in African cultures as you have in Swedish
Yeah.
cultures.
Yeah.
And how does that happen? Well,
Right. And submission and dominance, like I believe that, and I tell this to my clients often, like that's where when we tap into our fantasies and we notice, like, are you being submissive in your fantasies? Are you being domineering in your fantasies? Like, that's all part of the spectrum, and it's such a window to our soul and what we desire. And it also can create balance in our lives. Like, these are the types of things that I try to encourage my clients to look at. And when we do that, we start introducing this concept to them, like, oh, I do kind of enjoy being submissive in my fantasies or submissive with my partner. But people separate that from this idea, like everybody thinks BDSM is whips and chains and physical pain,
Right.
and um, and that there must be something wrong with the person that's
Exactly.
engaging in it, right? That's still extremely prevalent
It is.
because as much as I think that we like to say that we're a progressive country, we're actually still a pretty Christian based, religious based, faith based um, society, you know?
Yes. I mean, even when the social mores, as they are in the United States, kind of loose and weird, there's tremendous religious opposition to anything that is non-traditional sex.
Always.
How
Yeah.
do religions really grow? They grow by you having children and indoctrinating them into that religion from birth on,
Yeah.
and then try to force them to stick with it. But as we see, there have always been people who cannot,
Yeah.
and it's not because they're sinners.
It's
It's
not.
because I believe, and I'm hoping that epigenetics and the continued unraveling of genomes are going to prove that there is a genetic basis for the commonalities we see globally.
Yeah.
You know,
It's human nature.
it is
You
human
know,
nature.
the more and more research that's being done, is showing that this is all human nature, and the things that they're telling us that are normal, in quotes, that are actually normative, are not based in science, right? They're not based in any actual research. They're based on this idea of heaven and hell. They're based on this idea of sin, and none of that is based in
And it's
science.
all about shaming you into obedience.
Yes,
That
it's
is
about
the
control.
goal.
At the end of the day, we all know, those of us that do this work, that is a lot about control and supporting the patriarchy, and we won't even get into that on this conversation because I want to talk about you, Dr. Gloria.
Okay.
You've done such important work, and you have a new book out.
I
Um, and
do.
I want you to first tell us about different loving a little bit, tell our audience about that, and then the journey of the different, because you write in a bunch of different genres, the journey from then to the journey to the book that you just came out with now.
Well, as I said, I was a poet and literary writer. I thought that's what I was going to do professionally. Writing different loving changed all that because I couldn't really work at my colleges anymore. I couldn't teach anymore. I got
Really?
fired from jobs. Well, because in 1993, that book made me a notorious, untrustworthy, perverted psycho.
In some circles. In other circles, you were very much
The
celebrated.
circles that had power over institutions and over,
Yes.
I got censored from everything like the first 5 years after. Only one place didn't censor me, and that was Cosmopolitan magazine. And I thank them for helping me get through some, really tough financial years after the book came out. But nobody was at the time. I laugh now because now, like, people rush to review outrageous books, but not in the 90s. I just got censored everywhere. I even got censored from a book signing that I was supposed to have at the former Borders because they were like, no, we don't, corporate is afraid it'll look like we're endorsing your perversions. So I
Oh,
came out of that experience, but here's the thing, I kind of knew it was going to happen, you know, and I accepted that risk. And I was married to a fellow kinky person and my co-author on the book, Gloria Brame. And, we kind of decided, we made a pact that if the other one was okay with it, then it was good for the team,
yeah.
So I just kept moving ahead and I went back to school and got a PhD. So I initially got it so that it would, for the next book I plan to write, maybe I thought with a PhD that would remove some stigma,
Uh-huh. That makes sense.
because when I wrote Different Loving, I didn't have a PhD.
Okay.
Um, but as a writer, first of all, that was the first nonfiction book I'd ever written.
Hmm.
I had tried my hand at novels, never finished them, never published them, but I had never had such an extensive nonfiction writing thing going on in my life. And after I was done with it, I mean, it was really interesting. And I was really happy that I had succeeded in writing this big nonfiction book, but it didn't feed my soul the way the creative writing does.
Uh-huh.
So what I decided to do was to experiment with whatever book genres I could. And that meant I did write, my next two books were nonfiction.
Hmm.
And after that, I started working on some memoirs. And after that, in the last 5 years, I've written so far 3 books in novel form. This last book, actually, that I just published called Kink So Real is actually a group of interwoven stories with a cast of characters that some of whom appeared in the earlier 2 novels. And my goal with all of that, first of all, was to feed my soul, because one novel I wrote when Trump was elected and I was having a psychic breakdown. And the other novel
Yes.
I wrote when COVID began.
Okay.
Because again, the idea of just tying myself down to something that would be very, nonfiction is just a slog, it's just copious research, and there's very little room to be creative.
Yeah.
And I needed something that nourished me. So I thought, that's it. I'm going to write my first novel and publish it. And I did. And, but my goal through all of these books, every one of my books, is actually to kind of tell the same story about sex in different genres. So, for example, my memoir is really about how a person like me, a sexual revolutionary, what made me revolutionary. And a lot of it had to do with the experiences I'd had and how much diversity I had witnessed.
Hmm.
Even in my early, from the time I was 12 or 13 and also my parents were kind of lefty. So they never gave me any kind of religious guilt complex or religious shame. I mean, still
Hmm.
social guilt and social shame about, who you are with other people. But not that inner torment that people with religious trauma, who I often treat, you
Hmm.
know, deal with when they grow up. So to me, even when I was a kid, I was like, these 2 people are married, but they seem to me like they hate each other. Do they even have a sex life? They probably don't, and
Right.
like, what's going on with them,
Yeah.
because back in those days, even divorce was considered shameful
Yeah.
and a betrayal of your faith.
Right.
You marry somebody, it's permanent, you have no agency once you sign that contract. And once I started fooling around and sleeping around with guys in my teens, I was an early bloomer, needless to say. No two were alike.
Yeah.
Some of them wanted this and some of them wanted that, and some of them, I didn't know what it was called, but when I looked back, I realized they were pretty kinky.
Yeah.
Did they even know they were kinky? Or did
It's
they think that?
sometimes it's yeah, it's sometimes it's the definitions, it's the labels that trips people up, right? Yeah.
Absolutely, because like I remember, and I was very young, this was an early boyfriend with whom I had, I guess what you would call soft swinging, and that it was,
Oh, swinging. Yeah.
there
Mhm.
was no fluid exchange really between us, but we were fooling around naked. And I remember, he wanted me to knee him in the groin, and he kept saying harder. And I always thought, like, if you need a man in the groin, he would break,
Yeah.
scream. But he loved it,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah.
And, it took me 20 years to realize, whoa, that's kinky. That, that is hella kinky,
That's hella kinky. Yeah. Yeah.
That's hella kinky, where I think back on, the guy who thought it would be really cool if I called him master in bed, or, you know what I mean? And this wasn't because I was looking for kink or I was seeking out kinky partners at all. I was just looking for guys to make out with,
Yeah.
and maybe a little extra, maybe a handy thrown in or something like that.
Yeah.
But their needs and desires, they were completely different universes as I got experience. And I thought that was so. When I write my memoirs, I talk a lot about that. I talk a lot about my shock at how people could even be homophobic. My family was not homophobic. They
Right.
were not comfortable with it, but
Yeah.
that's far away from being homophobic. It's not like if they met a homosexual, they'd be like angry,
Right.
hostile, or anything. They just sort of giggle and say, oh,
Yeah. I
the
mean,
kind of,
a lot of that has to do with the visibility and not being exposed to it as much, right? It makes you giggle,
yeah,
right? Yeah.
exactly.
But then
They were
there's
a little
homophobia and it's
uncomfortable.
hateful.
Right. They weren't hateful, and they really weren't even prejudiced. They were very well aware
Hmm.
that there were people like that,
Right.
that maybe some of their friends might be. And they just never talked about it because they always felt that sex was in the private realm, which I believe as well. That you don't owe anybody any explanation of what you like to do and when you're being sexual with somebody.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot to be said about that. Like, it is a private thing, as activists and revolutionaries and educators, we've had to make it more public for our political platform. But at
Mhm.
the end of the day, and so that people don't suffer from that shame, right? They can do what they need to do behind closed doors with their partners with consent. But the platform I think that you and I have, we have to, it does have to be a little bit more public to make
Right.
that, to have more massive change.
And in the old days, it's completely changed now, but let's say in the 90s, everybody wanted to know, would they would want me to like whip somebody on TV. And I'd be, no, that's like asking Dr. Ruth, may she rest in peace, to give a blowjob on TV to demonstrate it. No, it's my sex life.
Yeah, yeah. You
So,
could teach a class on it,
mhm.
charge
So,
them, but not for television.
right. And
Yeah.
so with my memoirs, I talked about my personal history, what I think, not what made me pervy, but what it was like just growing up as me, what I went through, all of the experiences, from my traumatic loss of virginity, which I chose, but which turned out not to be anything like what I expected, to,
Hmm.
embracing sexual diversity. by the
Yeah.
time I was in my late teens, because by then I had friends, whether they were out or not, who were queer,
Yeah.
right?
And I think memoir is great for, people can sort of relate to a story,
Right.
as opposed to, a book like Different Loving where you're
I love your memoir.
thanks, Gloria.
Your memoir is going to be hot, hot, hot.
Coming
Yeah.
soon.
Yeah,
But like Different Loving is for one kind of audience and for one, it serves one kind of purpose, but writing your memoirs definitely serves a different kind of purpose because, and it
that's
also lends to the credibility of you as a person writing books, or doing
facts.
the research, right? It
Right.
lends
Well,
to,
first came you know, there's the evidence-based work, which is what my blog is like too.
Mhm,
I don't really talk about personal stuff. I talk about what goes on in sex therapy usually, or the problems that arise in sex therapy. And it's very evidence-backed.
mhm,
It's either anecdotal evidence from the office, or I refer to a lot of studies, or like I recently wrote an article about all the different ways women can come
mhm.
that most women are not even aware of. In
People
fact,
don't
if they
even know
tried,
about. Yeah.
all the different kinds of physical stim that's
Mhm.
going to turn a woman on, with parts of the body that people never expect
Yeah.
would turn women on, including I got email from like two women, both post 70, who are like, oh my God, I learned stuff I never knew. That's amazing.
And because sexuality is also a lifelong journey and your body's always changing. So it doesn't matter how old you are.
Exactly.
You
And
can
you're
learn.
always evolving. Things that you might have
Yeah.
liked 20 years ago could be stale now, new things.
And they should be stale now because we want to continue growing, evolving,
Exactly.
learning, changing. Yeah.
So the novel thing, I really did it for myself, but, to feed my own spirit because
Yeah.
of all the,
Because you're an artist too at the end of the day.
but I made these, like, it was sort of like, how do I educate people about BDSM without being a nerd?
Yeah.
I would say that's kind of that was part of writing these novels, which is
Awesome.
writing stories about people I felt that I really, really knew. Because almost every character in the book, I always had a particular friend or sometimes two friends, and I kind of borrowed from both their lives. So I have, like in this latest one, Kink So Real, you know, uh, I have the lovelorn, submissive guy who gets ripped off early in his journey and finally finds an extremely unconventional woman to accept him as he is.
Okay. Uh-huh.
Um, I write about the main
I feel
character,
like I have clients that I can share that book with because that's gonna be that's a thing. Where do they find their partners? And that it's
right?
possible to find someone.
And how you overcome um, all the sort of ableist crap, because the dominatrix he falls in love with is a very tiny woman.
Hmm.
She considers herself a dwarf. He does not. He finds her petite. But she, by the
Huh?
textbooks, she says, I fit the label. And he's like, the label is bullshit. You are who you are. You're a wonderful human being, just in a smaller package. Or I have uh, a triad who are in their 70s and 80s and have stuck together for like 30 or 40 years through thick and thin. And now they're retiring and they're completely retired and they're just planning to live out their years together. And out of the blue, they somehow end up adopting in the kinky way, taking in some people who are much younger than them. And at first they're like really horrified. Why would anyone in their 30s or 40s want to play with people in their 70s and 80s, but actually it turns out to be a wonderful blessing to everybody. And they lead a lifestyle relationship, the triad, with one of them who was a former pro-dom being their head of the house. And they're
Okay.
like super happy people, you know?
I love that your book, this new book, Kink So Real, tackles ableism, ageism, all around kink and sexuality and BDSM. That's all really great.
It's
Really
it's
great.
all of these topics. Some of the members, so the main character in all, or a main character in all three of the books in this series, she was a pro-dom, and you could read about her journey in
Mhm.
a 20-year look at her life in Amazon Hammer, which is really focused on her and her
Book
life.
right before that you wrote right
Right,
before this one, right? Okay.
right, the prequel to this one. In this one, she emerges another 12 years later when she's married the love of her life, a
Hmm.
submissive guy she
Hmm.
randomly met. She was raised by her great gay grandfather, so she has
Okay.
a completely different perspective on everything. And they have children, and she moved away from being a pro-dom and moved away from the scene and formed her own little leather family.
Okay. Wow. Really colorful characters with
Right.
like really in-depth backgrounds and really kind of
Right.
exposing the diversity of,
Exactly.
human
So it's
nature.
right. And there are gay people in the family, and there are Black people in the family, and people are all kinds of different ages in the family. There's a lesbian couple, there's a couple of gay bon vivants in the family. There are people of all different ages, although even her children appear in the book, but they're not part of the larger BDSM things. And she sets her husband up to work as a pro dom, as a professional master, even though he was submissive to her. And
Uh-huh.
he's finding it to be an exhilarating journey. And then you get to peek in on some of the more intense fetishes,
Uh-huh.
because I picked two fetishes that a lot of people have problems with.
Oh, okay. We'll have to read the book to find out what those are. It's exciting. I mean, you're such a prolific sexual revolutionary, like so many different types of so many genres. How many books? Is it 12 books, did you say?
I think I have 11, but I might have 12. I don't know. I've written some short books. I don't count them.
And what's next? I mean, are you gonna write? I'm sure you're gonna continue writing because
I have
that's
at least two more books I have to write, or life has no meaning. But when I'm done with those two, I'll have two more books I have to write, or life has no meaning. Um, yeah. My next book, actually, I did a series of nonfiction books called The Truth About Sex.
Uh-huh.
So volume one was called Sex and the Self, and it's really all about your relationship with your own sexuality.
Hmm.
So it's a big focus on masturbation and what it means and how normal it is and how we are wired. It's not a sin. It's something we are wired to do for very good biological reasons and also for relationship reasons. So that it's an important, I call it masturbation in your youth, a stepping stone to adulthood.
Hmm.
And the second book was about all of the diversity and variety that people find in partnerships.
Hmm.
So that one was had a section that was very sort of multicultural, where I talk about, look, if you go to Nepal, it's common for a woman to have a couple of husbands.
Hmm.
And if you go to other places, I won't get into all of it, but just the variety of choices that are normal in other cultures, that we have to look outside of American culture to get a picture of what human sexuality is. Because
Absolutely.
a lot of people have just swallowed the politically correct line according to religion and political party.
Yeah.
And that does not tell us anything
Mhm.
about natural human behavior.
Yeah. So your
Because
next book is going to be is
the
it the
third
third?
volume,
The
right?
third in the series.
Yeah,
Great.
I know. The last one was published like in 2012, and I said, coming next year. That was hopeful. You
I'm
know,
guilty of that too. It's in the works, and then like 10 years later, 15 years
yeah.
later.
So
Yeah.
I am gonna do that, both because my publisher expects it and because I expect it of myself. So I am gonna write,
And now our listeners expect it. So
yeah. So, and the real thing is, some people are like, write another book on BDSM. But I want to make it bigger again. I don't want it. And these books in the Truth About Sex series, of course, I normalize transgenderism. I normalize BDSM. Everything is normal if enough people do it.
Mhm.
If you have a population of people doing this particular thing, and you can even see that it's a global population, hey, that's
It
normal.
it's gonna it changes people's perspective 100%. Yeah. And people, the thing is that people need to hear it, people need to see it because it's also a reflection of them. Most
Right.
people identify with it and some don't even realize they do. And of course, the people that show up in our offices, they're already struggling with it. But then there's all the people that don't show up in our offices that maybe have pushed it down, ignored it, repressed it, all of the things. So,
Yeah.
it's
And
very
at the time when I wrote those first two volumes, it was really hard to find research. So what I had to do was go and read all these medical studies, which
and
is not a
or
science.
conduct your own research.
I had it, and what I did is I put together like this really crazy interdisciplinary patchwork of studies showing how good masturbation was you by, well, hey, a bunch of psychologists did the study and people feel a lot less depressed when they masturbate. And I did this urological study, and wow, people have better penis health if they masturbate 3 times a week. And wow, and cardiologists are reporting that, the common trait among people who don't have heart problems seems to be that they masturbate a certain number of times a week. So easy to conclude from that that orgasm is a vital function in human life
Yeah.
for human health. So now, oh my God, I mean, so many places have quoted me about that stuff. Now it's like common knowledge.
It
And
is, but I think that, like, the common knowledge is spreading, but
Mhm.
people are still hearing the voices of whether it's their pastor or their parents, it's still
Less so
being
among the
generated.
current generation than
Yeah,
ever before. I mean, people who were born and immediately got on the internet as children, they know so much more
they
than
do.
their parents or
Mhm.
their grandparents about sex, and nothing really freaks them out. And I see people in my practice who are leaving religions precisely because they have access to that information and they're like, what?
Yeah. So many people are leaving religion and coming to this do this kind of work as well. So,
Right. And a lot of them, they're going to find something that works for them, but they're not going back to their parents' faith.
no. No. Yeah.
They're choosing faiths that will accept and accommodate them
Yeah.
and not make them feel like, they're going to hell because they like to kiss the same-sex partner. you know
Yeah.
they're gonna, I think that's going to be a big change that
Okay.
will continue to evolve, and they're not going to be upset if their kid comes out as gay either,
Mhm.
or kick their trans kid out of the house, or mistreat them and send them to conversion therapy and all of those horrible, hateful things. So what has changed so much and so fast is the internet and its impact on how people receive information about sex and are open now. I mean, the diversity is out of the closet, you know, and it's good and it's bad, you know.
Yeah.
I'm an optimist. I want to think that it's mainly good, but there are, people are people. There are always going to be bad actors who fuck
Hmm.
things up for the others, you know. But for the most part, I do really admire the young generation for focusing so much energy on what is consensual and learning about consent culture, which really comes from kinky people,
Yep.
kind of innovated
100%.
and educated on it,
Hmm.
and but that's fine. Let the mainstream have it as long as they don't hurt anybody. You know what I mean? If
That's
they're,
fine.
that's right. That's the best possibility, is that these kinds of conversations and intentional sex and stuff like that, these are beautiful values, I think. So I'm pretty
Yeah.
happy about that. And that's probably some of what I'm going to write about, but I think I'll take a more personal turn this time and not
Mm.
hamper everybody with the science.
Yeah, you could do a self-help science-y memoir.
All in one.
All in one. That's the thing. It's the thing. Well, Dr. Gloria Brame, this has been such an awesome conversation. I've gotten to know you kind of over the years, so this really gives me a lot of insight into how you became such a, profound
When I
figure in our field.
when I realized that sex could be a scholarly pursuit, my
Game
whole life
changer.
changed. It,
Yeah.
it, it just changed my life. It was for the first time in my life, I felt like, wow, this is really meaningful. It's meaningful to me personally, and it's meaningful to the world. And I'm as passionate about it now at age 69 as I was when I first encountered it at age 30. So I think it's pretty cool.
It's very cool. All right. So I'm going to put Dr. Gloria Brame's links down in the comments below or down in the caption below, along with where you can buy her latest book, Kink So Real, and where you can get in touch with her for counseling, sex therapy, public speaking, what have you. I'll put all those links down. And thank you so much for chatting with me
It
today, Dr. Gloria
it is
Brame.
always a pleasure speaking with you, Mo.
All right. Thank
Really
you.
is.
All
Okay.
right.
Thank you for
Take
letting
care.
me speak to your audience. I really appreciate it.
And thank you so much. Take
Oh,
care.
you too.
Bye.
Bye.